Welcome to the Pro Football Network YouTube channel. My name is Arif Hasan, and today we'll be going over my power rankings for the best defenses in the NFL. We used a model that takes into account the draft, free agency, and trade. Should be a ton of fun. 32 teams coming your way right now. But before you get into that, make sure to hit the like button on this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell so that you get notified when new content drops. We've got a ton of new content heading your way. You're not going to want to miss it. But for now, let's take a look at the power rankings for the 32 defenses in the NFL. At 32 are the Los Angeles Rams. They're projected to have the worst defense in the NFL according to our model, and it's a shame given that they have the single best defensive player in the NFL on their team. But no one player can swing outcomes, especially when surrounded by talent that might be on par with the large undrafted free agent class that they've brought in. Byron Young should help with the pass rush, but he's paired with Michael Hoke to a virtual unknown, and next to Aaron Donald are Bobby Brown III and Marquise Copeland, unless the 7th round pick outplays them. The linebacker unit has been raided, the cornerback group is unrecognizable, especially after the Jalen Ramsey trade, and it's just generally a difficult defense to project outcomes for. Here, though, it makes sense to err on the side of caution. At number 31 are the Chicago Bears. They invested pretty heavily into their defense in free agency, but the truth of the matter is that linebacker, where they invested the most, seems to impact outcomes the least. They made some improvements in the secondary, and perhaps the model doesn't account for how much that young cornerback group will improve, but without a pass rush and an inconsistent back end, the Bears have very little going for them. At number 30 are the Las Vegas Raiders. The Raiders didn't lose any astounding players in free agency, but they did lose some players, and they didn't replace those losses with big upgrades, except for maybe Marcus Epps at safety. The biggest improvement comes from draft pick Tyree Wilson at the edge, who's going to overtake Clelin Ferrell, but with a weak secondary and a weak linebacker unit, it's hard to call that enough to see substantial change. And number 29 are the New York Giants. The Giants had a glaring hole at cornerback that they fixed with Deonte Banks, but they still have work to do at that position and at safety. Without a strong projected unit at linebacker and with only a modest pass rush despite some excellent and very recognizable names there's a reason to believe that the Giants will stay about the same defensively or get worse. And number 28 are the Atlanta Falcons. The Falcons added a lot of pieces to their defense, but they functionally replaced underperformers with other underperformers with the exception of Jesse Bates III and Jeff Okudah. Other than them, it's hard to tell where the new pieces represent upgrades over the old ones. With all of that in mind, Atlanta doesn't move that much from where they were last year. And number 27 are the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jacksonville Jaguars have some pieces to work with, as Josh Allen at edge and Tyson Campbell at quarterback played really well last year, but there are quite a few unknowns and nothing specifically that stands out as an elite piece on their defense. In order to crack the top half, they'll need big improvements from former first-round picks Devin Lloyd and Travon Walker. Without that, they're going to find themselves at the bottom. And number 26 are the Minnesota Vikings. The Vikings are slated actually to improve defensively, but not enormously. This is better than where they finished in EPA per play last year. They revamped their secondary, that helps a lot, but the turnover they've had makes them difficult to project. They functionally replaced some veteran corners with a bunch of first and second year players. It's tough to see how they'll do. Losing Zadarius Smith deals a pretty big blow to their hopes as a pass rushing unit, but they've improved overall as a defense. Where they're coming from just wasn't that great to begin with. And number 25 are the Los Angeles Chargers. The Chargers have some underrated players in their secondary, and they added Eric Kendricks to replace Drew Tranquill, but they still have some holes on the defensive line, at linebacker next to Kendricks, and at safety next to Derwin James, especially with the retirement of Nasir Adderley. They should improve their pass rush with Tui Tuipulotu, but they've lost a lot of depth along the way. And number 24, the Tennessee Titans. The Titans were pretty active in free agency. They lost players like Alvin Dupree, Lonnie Johnson, and DeMarcus Walker, but they added Sean Murphy-Bunting and Arden Key. They didn't add anyone on defense in the draft, though. It was an all-offense draft, and that keeps the Titans at the bottom half defensively. And number 23 are the Seattle Seahawks. This is a pretty modest improvement. They ranked 26th in the NFL defensively last year, and they don't project to change all that much despite investing a 5th overall pick at cornerback. That should improve the quality of play at cornerback, but that wasn't really an issue for Seattle last year. The model might undercount Jamal Adams' return to play at safety, but it knows just overall that there isn't much in the way of pass rush or interior talent. And number 22 are the Carolina Panthers. Aside from Brian Burns and J.C. Horn, there just isn't much in the way of marquee players on that defense. Von Bell will help, of course, but without investment in the draft, the Panthers are projected to be about as good a defense as they were last year. And number 21 are the Houston Texans. The Texans went on a free agency blitz and added the top pass rusher in the draft, which should improve their defensive showing over last year, but last year the defense was helped with explosives and unsustainable plays. Their success rate was only 26th in the NFL in 2022, and while that should improve, their EPA per play should probably drop despite being a more consistent and more talented team. At number 20 are the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Buccaneers don't have a pass rush solution, but they do have an exciting secondary. Nevertheless, they lose ground by having lost substantial depth across their defense. Kalijah Kancey should improve things, and maybe Yaya Diaby does as well, but it's difficult to fully trust a third-round pick as a premier edge rusher. At 19 of the Green Bay Packers, the Packers have always been a pretty difficult defense to model because they always have talented players that just haven't gotten the results on the field, and that might be a coordinating problem. Either way, it's difficult to account for. We ding the Packers for losing Dean Lowry, and that ding might be a little bit harsh because our model projects replacements coming from late in the draft instead of the first-round pick they had last year, but Devontae Wyatt hasn't proven they can exceed Dean Lowry's level of play. At linebacker, they've got another first-round pick in Quay Walker, who's going to need to improve pretty significantly to help out all-pro Devondre Campbell, and the model is not optimistic about that safety duo either. If defensive coordinating can bring that talent out and make the most of Jaire Alexander's talents, they should be fine. At 18 of the Cleveland Browns, trading for Zadarius Smith was pretty big for them. They get a huge boost in the pass rush as a result of that, and having Dalvin Tomlinson on the inside should mean that their defensive front overall is pretty solid. On paper, that secondary should also return some pretty substantial gains, but there's been some inconsistency amidst all that talent. They've got some weaknesses at positions that matter a little bit less, but primarily, we just need to see improvements at safety and more consistency among that young cornerback group. At 17 are the Arizona Cardinals. The Cardinals added a second-round pick at pass rusher and a third-round pick at corner, and that should improve their prospects, but the improvement won't be much after losing Byron Murphy and Zach Allen. At 16 are the Pittsburgh Steelers. There's something to be said about the Steelers' second-round investment in the defense, which is the reason they move up in the rankings from last year when looking at EPA per play. They made slight upgrades at linebacker, and though replacing Cameron Sutton with Patrick Peterson isn't fantastic, having Joey Porter Jr. and the likelihood of a high-level pass rush with TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith makes them a pretty reasonable defense. At 15 are the Detroit Lions. The Lions had one of the worst defenses in the NFL last year, so seeing them ranked 15 might be a little bit of a surprise, but they should improve dramatically through a combination of just general regression and additions like Emmanuel Mosey, CJ Gardner-Johnson, Cameron Sutton, Brian Branch, and Jack Campbell, even after they lost Jeffrey Okudah. They should also see a bit more in the way of pass rush than last year, despite limited investment there, which means that they can compete. At 14 are the New Orleans Saints. Adding Brian Bresee and Isaiah Foskey should help the Saints, who finished 10th in the defensive EPA last year, but they lost quite a bit of defensive talent. Marcus Davenport, David Onyemata, Caden Ellis, and Shai Tuttle are all gone. Not only that, it's tough to project high-level play for Paulson Adebo and Bradley Roby, despite excellent secondary players that they have otherwise. If they have a fully healthy season from Marshawn Lattimore, one might be able to see where they could be better than 14th, but they lose a little bit of ground overall in 2023. At 13 are the Kansas City Chiefs. The Chiefs had an exciting and young secondary last year. They retained their defensive coordinator, but losing Frank Clark at edge rusher is pretty tough. They've got a first-round edge rusher to help make up that difference, but it's just difficult to overcome. Not only that, a young secondary without a strong history of play is difficult to project. They are a volatile unit that could just as easily improve as rapidly fall off. At number 12 are the Baltimore Ravens. Aside from safety, where the Ravens might actually be elite with Marcus Williams and Kyle Hamilton, the Baltimore seems to be average across the board. They should see some upgrade on linebacker play with the addition of Trenton Simpson, but they need a jump in performance from Odafe Oweh to really establish themselves as a high-level defense. At 11 are the Indianapolis Colts. The Colts have one of the strongest units along the defensive interior with Grover Stewart, DeForest Buckner, and rookie Adetomo Adebawore, but they should see some good play as well in that secondary with Julius Brents, Julian Blackmon, Isaiah Rodgers, Kenny Moore, and Rodney Thomas II. Most importantly, they should see Shaquille Leonard return to action. The Colts have some of the best units at linebacker and the defensive line, but they don't crack our top 10 because those positions just historically matter a little bit less. At number 10 are the Cincinnati Bengals. The Bengals lost 2 good safeties in free agency and a starting cornerback and are still considered to be a potentially good defense. Some of that has to come from the fact that Dax Hill is projected to play well in replacement, as is Nick Scott. Losing Eli Apple might actually even be addition by subtraction. With Miles Murphy added to the pass rush, the Bengals are largely expected to play pretty well. At number 9 are the Denver Broncos. The Broncos didn't help themselves defensively by exchanging Dre'Mont Jones for Zach Allen, but without that, adding a third-round player in the secondary with Riley Moss and finding themselves supporting Patrick Surtain too on the back end is a critical value. Losing Bradley Chubb partway through the season hurts, but it's important not to discount Randy Gregory or Brer Browning when it comes to the pass rush. At 8 are the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles lost the starting duo of linebackers and interior defensive linemen, both starting safeties and defensive line depth. Nevertheless, keeping the cornerbacks and continuously adding to the defense in the draft of the previous 2 years has allowed them flexibility to maintain their defensive edge, though not quite at the level of play that they had last year. At number 7 are the Miami Dolphins. Just like the Lions, the Dolphins have a huge leap in their rankings. They finished 24th in EPA on defense, but adding Jalen Ramsey and Deshaun Elliott in free agency, along with David Long, goes a long way to projecting a high-level performance on that side of the ball. Second-round Cam Smith at cornerback changes things as well, and with a projection that Xavier Howard finds something close to his old form, it's not difficult to envision the Dolphins' defense bursting onto the scene despite their underperformance last last year. At 6 are the Buffalo Bills. The Bills are projected to have a full season with Von Miller and Tre'Davious White, which helps pretty tremendously. The elite safety pair that they have in Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer is still there, but there are questions about cornerback and edge play opposite White and Miller. They also suffer a small amount for losing Tremaine Edmonds in free agency, but the foundation of this defense is strong. At 5 are the New England Patriots. They're like the mirror image version of the Green Bay Packers, where their defensive coordinating brings more production out of the field than the individual level of talent that they have, so they're pretty difficult to project. But they did add a high level of talent by adding Christian Gonzalez in the draft, and they re-signed all their defensive free agents and added Keon White to the group as well, which should mean that they maintain their high level of defensive performance. At 4 are the Washington Commanders. The Commanders finished 7th in points last year and 5th in EPA per play allowed, but they aren't considered by most people to be a high-level defense, and they should be. They added to the secondary with a first and second round pick at cornerback, and they've got a capable safety in Cameron Curl. They have a fantastic interior, and they should have high-level edge play, even if Chase Young isn't completely healthy in the entire season. At 3 are the San Francisco 49ers. The 49ers suffer a little bit for having a defensive unit reliant on turnovers to generate their value, but they still have the fundamentals of sustainable play. The issue keeping them out of the top 2 is that linebacker, their position of strength, and defensive interior, which they focused on in free agency, matter a lot less than cornerback does. They've got a high-level defense, but losing edge depth, Emmanuel Mosley, and safety Jimmy Ward, that hurts. At 2 are the Dallas Cowboys. The Cowboys look like they may have the best pass rush in 2023, and they supplement that with a secondary that features both Trevon Diggs and Stephon Gilmore. In that context, losing Anthony Brown doesn't mean very much, and they've got very little roster turnover aside from that. They should continue to play at a high level going forward. At number 1 are the New York Jets, who we project to have the best defense in the NFL in 2023. They ranked 6th last year in expected points per play, but they've got a great chance of having the best cornerback duo with Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed on the back end, along with some improvements in the secondary with Chuck Clark at safety, who they recently traded for. Their pass rush should improve with the addition of Will McDonald IV in the first round, and they might see some improvement from Dwayne Johnson, who they drafted in the first round last year. They're likely to continue to have strong interior with Quinnen Williams, Quentin Jefferson, and despite having a quarterback group that created short field positions for them in 2022, the Jets actually ranked 4th in total points allowed last year. Without that restriction at quarterback, we may recognize the Jets as a top-tier defense in 2023. Thank you for tuning in. Do you agree with the list? I know that the model sometimes spits out some pretty counterintuitive projections, but if you've got some disagreements or something that you want to add, comment in the comment section below. While you're there, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Click the bell to get notified so that you know when new content drops.